Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week we're reading one of the most difficult passages in all of Scripture, the story of the near sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis 21, 1-3 and 22, 1-14. After years of waiting, Sarah and Abraham have finally received Isaac, the child promised to them by God. But almost as soon as the promise is fulfilled, God commands Abraham to take the boy up on a mountain and offer him there as a sacrifice. We feel for Abraham, whose devotion to God sets him at odds with his devotion to his family, and we wonder how we might navigate tensions between faith and family. And we wonder about this God who demands sacrifice, but relents in the end. Is this a moment where God chooses relationship over obedience, a new way of being God in the presence of the other? In seeing Abraham's apparent willingness to offer Isaac on the mountain, we wonder, what exactly are we willing to sacrifice our children for? Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's Bible Worm time.
Hey, Bobby, how are ya?
I am doing pretty well. How are you?
Also pretty well.
That is the most riveting. That is the most riveting thing.
We are alive and kicking.
That's what you can hope for sometimes these days.
Still kicking.
Still on the move. Yeah. Hey, Amy, we are this week in our second week of this narrative lectionary season, and we have moved from Genesis chapter 1, where we had everything was created, to Genesis 21, 1-3, and 22, 1-14, which, as you know, is the story of Abraham's near sacrifice, spoiler alert, of his son Isaac. We have moved a ways. One thing that is possible, of course, if you need to get some more nuance about where we are, is to go back to the previous seasons and read the Genesis texts, which this is really, we're in year 4, and so this is really the last of the Abraham texts. And so, if you just want to fill in with the podcast, you can go back to whatever that was, 3 years ago, and start with the Genesis 12 podcast.
Listen to all the episodes, yes.
But let's
still won't get you all of it, but it'll get you some good, good-sized stones for jumping across the river.
Yes. Yeah. Let's just imagine that someone might not want to do that and listen to 4 hours of Bible Worm this week.
It's crazy.
Can you help us bridge the gap from creation to the end of the Abraham story?
I think what I would say is sometimes things don't go well in the plan that God seems to be laying out in the biblical text. And so we have this wonderful creation story, and then a few chapters later, it seems that the world has been enveloped in violence and horribleness. And so God kind of starts over with a flood, wipes out everything except Noah and his lineage.
Yes.
And then, that too seems like maybe we need to narrow it down yet further. Instead of just having sort of a covenant with this new group of people, God seems to want to narrow it down even more and say, let's go real tight in and pick one individual and make a covenant with this individual and his lineage.
Yes.
And so that is the covenant we see with Avram, who is called into it for reasons that are not entirely clear from the biblical text, but he is responsive to God from the beginning. And then this is what happens to Avram. Now, I don't know how to fill in the whole. I mean, every chapter is so full in Genesis. Yes. Okay, I'll say one more thing. Avram does not have any children, and he is already at the time of this covenant with God getting to be an older man who does not have children. And it appears that he is not, it appears biologically unlikely that he is going to have a child. And God keeps just sort of asserting like, no, it's going to be okay. You're going to have a child. And it is one of those things where you just have to kind of wait and see. There's no way to know until it's actually happening.
Yes.
So lots of bumps and curves on the way in this relationship between Avram and God. And we're going to read about a large bump along the way in their relationship in today's text.
Yes.
What did I miss? What do you feel?
Oh, that was so beautiful, Amy. A couple of the ways that you worded things really were getting my head moving in a different way, which I always appreciate. One was just the way that you said, out of all of humanity, God chose this one individual, which I mean, it's true. Like that's the clear reading of the biblical text. But somehow, I think in my head, I transpose that to God chose one people out of all the people. But you're right, at this beginning stage, God chose one person out of all the people. And just like, for some reason, that sort of focused me on like, what would that have been like to be that one person? Like, here's all of humanity, and God's like, you're my person. And that would be like a lot.
Yeah, no pressure.
The other thing that you said there that I think is so important, and it informs my reading of today's text, is that God seems to pick Abraham for no particular reason. Mm-hmm. God just shows up at the end of chapter 11 and seems to meet Abraham for the first time, maybe. Like, we don't get any narrative before that.
No.
And the first thing God does is just show up and say, like, you know what? I'm going to bless you, and you're going to have 1 million descendants, and they are going to be my chosen people. And Abraham does not seem to have earned that in any particular way. You are right that Abraham is responsive from the very beginning, which is important, but God's initial selection of Abraham seems to be, at least in my reading, just God's own free choice.
Yeah.
And the rabbis go back and fill in the 10
Yes, because these questions are driving them crazy too. They're like, there must be a reason.
Yes.
The biblical text does not give us that reason.
No reasons. So what has happened at this point? I mean, it's been a long time since Abraham and Sarah got this promise of a child. And we've been through the whole Ishmael affair. And in chapter 18, God has said, no, to Sarah, it's going to be you. And God, in that famous story where God shows up and there's 3 people, that whole Genesis 18 thing, and says, a year from now, you're going to have a child. And where we pick up today in Genesis 21 is the fulfillment of that promise in chapter 18. So the first part of our text is just that story of the fulfillment in Genesis 21, 1-3. So I'll read that part in the Common English Bible. The Lord was attentive to Sarah, just as he had said, and the Lord carried out what he had promised her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son for Abraham when he was old, at the very time God had told him. Abraham named his son, the one Sarah bore him, Isaac. Okay, that's a fairly, newsreel, here's the headline kind of a text.
Yeah.
Are there things in there that you want to lift out in particular?
There were a couple little things that stood out to me this time around reading it. One was the emphasis, maybe this should be sort of obvious that it would be this way, but the emphasis in the first 2 verses on the role of God and sort of their dependence on God for this to have happened. The first verb, if you're looking at the Hebrew, the translation is as God promised, and I understand that's why it says that, I understand why it says that, but they're verbs of speech, like as God said, there are 2 verbs of speech in there, and that just seems like God spoke, and the words that God spoke are meaningful. Like that has caused the thing to happen. It's not quite like creation where God speaks and it happens right away, but the fact that it has been spoken matters.
Yes.
The other thing that stands out to me in the 3rd verse, so I feel like the first 2 verses are sort of focused there, especially pointing out that this is happening at the time that God said this was going to be the time.
Yes.
Like there's, like even though it's impossible biologically for this to be happening, God decided it's happening now, and so it's happening now. The third verse feels really, it doesn't come out in the English very well, but it says Abraham, it's talking about when Abraham named his son. And of course, Abraham is naming his son what God said Abraham ought to name his son, although the text doesn't remind us that God has already told Abraham what this name should be. But it says Abraham, called the name of his son the one which was born to him, which Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Like there's this sort of like threefold relationship of this human being to Abraham. And I don't know, that maybe because it parallels the sort of threefold relationship we'll see later on in chapter 2, but Beno hanolad lo asher yalda lo, like it just, I don't know, it really feels like it anchors itself in Abraham after all that.
Yes.
God stuff. Those are all my thoughts. That's everything.
Those are beautiful thoughts. So the one that is really sticking with me is this idea, first of all, of God speaking, and we've been making those connections probably because I'm thinking a lot about Walter Brueggemann, but that those connections in all the ways between speech and reality, and we saw that last week in here. When God speaks here, it creates the reality that follows, and the sort of reliability of it. It's like you get the impression it happened just as God said at the very time God told him. And so in this whole big, long, they've been waiting for decades at this point, I think. And we've got this sort of sense that it all happened in God's time. And so the anxiety, the anxiousness that has accompanied this story was human anxiousness. It was not about the reliability of God. It was just about the anxiousness of waiting from a human perspective. I also really love that emphasis on the connection to Abraham at the end and the specificity of the one Sarah bore him. So, Abraham's got two sons now, but it's clear that this is the one from his original wife, his first wife, Sarah. And so it's also a connection to her. You were mentioning the name Isaac, which God had told Abraham to name him. And that is related to the Hebrew, he laughs or something like that. Do you have thoughts about the significance of that name within the Abraham story?
I associate it with when Sarah overhears that this is all supposed to happen, back when you're talking about when the three visitors come and our angelic figures are talking to Abraham, and she laughs at the thought. They're like 90 and 100 or something like that at that point. And so she laughs at the thought that this could happen. And she gets a little bit called out for that. But I don't know. I love the idea of it sort of being like, not laugh like I'm making fun of that idea, but laugh like it's so unexpected and so delightful and so ridiculous in the best way that this this is what's happening. Like, that's how I think of Isaac's name being connected to laughter.
Yes, I like that a lot. You get the sense in the earlier parts of this story, and you see it again later in this chapter, that Sarah seems to have experienced, or at least felt herself to be sort of the butt of the joke among some people for not having had a child when she's quite old.
Yes, that's right.
And so there's this laughter in that derisive sense. And then later in this story, everybody that meets her laughs with her, like the kind you're saying, like, woohoo, isn't this like amazing? And so like that, the child who bears that name carries that transition from derisive laughter to laughter of joy. And it captures a lot about this story.
I love that full range of the word. Of the experience of laughter, that it could be making fun of someone, or it could be so like sharing joy with them. That's such a continuum there.
Yes. And when God sort of steps in, it converts the one kind of laughter to the other kind of laughter is sort of in there as well. So we've got this little baby now, and he is, the child of a long, long waiting and a miraculous fulfillment of a promise that seemed like maybe it was never going to be fulfilled, and that all the trials and struggles that Abraham and Sarah have been through to get there. Then just one chapter later, we get our main story for today, which is in Genesis 22, 1 through 14. After these events, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham." Abraham answered, "I'm here." God said, "Take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him up as an entirely burned offering there on one of the mountains that I will show you." Abraham got up early in the morning, harnessed his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, together with his son Isaac. He split the wood for the entirely burned offering, set out, and went to the place God had described to him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place at a distance. Abraham said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will walk up there, worship, and then come back to you." Okay, Amy, the first thing that I want to ask about is this little aside that the narrator gives to us before the story begins, but it does not give to Abraham, which is God tested Abraham. So you and I know from the very beginning that this is a test, whatever that means. But Abraham does not have that background knowledge, which creates this sort of interesting, like, what do you call that? Like dramatic irony in the text, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think. Like, do you read this as like a test of the emergency broadcast system where like you know the test isn't real from the very beginning, but you just want to make sure everything works? Or do you read this more like a test of a hero in the ancient world, that is, if you pass this test, then you know, if you can pull this, this isn't ancient, but if you can pull this sword out of that stone, then you get to be the king, like that kind of test. Do you have thoughts about that?
Oh, wow. I love that question, and it's like such a stark difference.
Very different.
Between them. Although in some ways, like I see this little bridge between those two possibilities. For some reason, I'm thinking today about the end stories of the Torah, of Deuteronomy, when we're sort of like about to go into the land and the Israelites are getting all these warnings about, once you have what it is you've wanted all this time you've wanted land, and once you have it, there's this fear that they're going to forget about God and not be, and
yes.
sort of, like forget that God's even in this equation because they have what they want. And so at least today, when I read that verb to test, I'm hearing it as it is a test of the emergency broadcast system. Like Abraham has been so attentive to what God has said before, but a sort of like testing the question, like, has your attentiveness changed now that you have what you want? The reason I'm hedging on that question about like drawing the sword out of the stone is that, I don't know, there's this constant debate within the Jewish community, at least today, about whether Abraham passed this proverbial test. Like, was the right answer to this test what Abraham did, or was it sort of like testing the waters, like, I'm going to see what you're going to do?
Yes.
Human.
On that reading, you mean maybe Abraham was not supposed to proceed, or that he didn't go far enough?
No, not that he didn't go far enough, because I think the text is pretty clear that he wasn't supposed to go any farther, at least in my reading of it. But that I almost wonder if you can read that verb test as almost like experiment. Like, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to take this relationship for a test drive and see what happens, kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know that that's really that might be more the English word test than this verb.
This is a conversation, like you and I are both sort of gesturing to the end of the story as a way of trying to talk about this announcement at the beginning of the story, which I think is entirely appropriate. And so we may want to come back to it. Mm-hmm. I will just say to you here at the beginning that I read this exactly the way you were like, oh no, don't read it that way, which is when God tests Abraham here, God actually intends that Abraham would follow through with this. God wants to know if Abraham will follow all the way through with this impossible task. Yeah. Now, I realize that that's not the only way to read it, and that you can read it as God from the very beginning knew that God was going to have a different plan at the end. You can read it that way for sure, and that's the way it has often been read. But I think it's interesting to hold out that possibility that maybe God, like the actual giving up of the actual son may be the thing that God really needs to know. Would you do this for me? And then that raises a whole interesting set of questions. When God calls to Abraham, the first thing is God just calls him by name, and Abraham says, I'm here I am, Hineni. I know that you have a particular affinity for that word. And can you talk to us a little bit about the significance of that?
Yeah, I do have a particular love for the word Hineni, and mostly because the moments where it comes up in the Torah, and also really to some degree in the prophets, although it's a little bit different there, I just feel like there are these moments where, like, I don't even know how to describe the feeling that I have in the text, but it sort of is like, okay, portrait mode on an iPhone?
Yes.
Where like it kind of blurs things in the background a little bit and really highlights like what we're taking a picture of is this.
Yes.
Like I feel like it locks two characters, for lack of a better word, into portrait mode.
Yes.
And everything else is kind of in the background, and they see each other, and they are present to each other, and they are connected to each other. And then you see sort of what happens after that. But like every time I come upon, like Moses says at the burning bush, Hineni, like what else are you supposed to say in that situation? You don't know what's happening, but everything else has kind of fallen away.
Yes.
So that sort of is what I imagine here, that Abraham hears God's voice and he just like locks into portrait mode.
In the English, the way it's often translated, here I am, can sound kind of locative, like I'm over here, And so I think that sometimes when people read that who are not familiar with Hebrew, haven't really thought through it very much, think of it as like a location device. The way that I translated it, I can't remember if this came out of grad school with you or if this was somewhere else, but was jazz hands. Like, it's not actually locative, but just like, doo-doo, like.
I like it.
But I like that way. The portrait mode I like a lot too, but it indicates a sort of like a presence before the one who has called. And like, I'm here with you, right? Like let's go. Or I think I've seen translations that are like ready.
Yes, I've seen ready too.
The way that God sort of reveals this test to Abraham, the wording of it is so interesting that you were noticing earlier the sort of progression of identifiers in chapter 21 of the child with Abraham. Here, God describes Isaac, like he's naming Isaac, but the way God gets there is take your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac. This sort of fourfold naming of the child. Can you talk about how you or the rabbis or whoever you're interested in, like, think about that? Like, why doesn't God just say, take your son Isaac?
I mean, I guess I feel like it. So there is a midrash where, it says, take your son. And Abraham says, I have two sons. And then God says, you're only one. And Abraham says, I have two sons. And then says, whom you love. And Abraham says, I love both my sons. And then he names Isaac, which is a good sort of callback to chapter 21.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
You could also see it, I sometimes see it as this, it's sort of like getting deeper and deeper into their connection to each other. Like your son, your only son, has a different kind of poignance or like grip on your heart. The one whom you love. And it's more and more sort of heart focused until it lands on the name Isaac. Like God's not trying to make this no big deal. Like that kid, or however old we're envisioning him to be at this point, like that kid over there, take him up to the mountain. That is not what God is saying. God wants Abraham to be like grounded in his heartfelt relationship to this person.
I love that, Amy, because you can read this text, or you could read this text as sort of God being kind of indifferent to the humanness of the child, or being dismissive of the relationship between Abraham and Isaac and saying, like, it's just your son, And so this verse, especially the way you're describing it, protects us against that. It is exactly the loving relationship and the deep relationship between these two that makes this test matter in some kind of way.
Yeah.
What God tells Abraham to do is go to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burned offering on one of the mountains. And so there's both specificity to this command and also kind of a vagueness, like go to the land and I'll show you the next thing when we get there.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts about that? Like with the significance of the vagueness combined with the specifics?
I love that you combined it with the specifics there, Bob, because the first thing that I was thinking was a connection back to chapter 12, where Abraham is first called and God says, go to the land that I will show you.
Right.
And he just has to trust well enough to get up and go and leave his family of origin, not knowing where they're headed. In this situation, he has an idea of where they're headed generally, but he can't just go on autopilot and do it he has to stay in touch with God this whole time because he doesn't know exactly where it's supposed to happen. So I guess that's how I feel the role of the vagueness. I'm not sure what to do with that, with the specificity, other than just that he has to get moving now.
Yes.
I don't know. What do you do with the more concrete part of this?
I love, first of all, that connection back to Genesis 12. And as you well know, in both of those texts, the imperative go, which could be said just as lech, is said in this sort of different form of lech lecha, like take yourself there. And you don't see that often in the biblical text, but you see it in Genesis 22 and in Genesis 12. And so that argument is that the text is trying to get us to see these two texts together exactly as you're describing. We've done this before, but in a different way that Abraham has gone. On the specificity, I mean, I don't know how insightful this is, but this text would be very different if like, hey, go someplace and when you get there, we're going to do some stuff. You know, like the fact that Abraham knows what the end result of this thing is going to be, like you are going to sacrifice your son. He knows that. And like that seems really important to the story. He does not know how it's going to happen or where it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. And so, I mean, in some ways it's in microcosm, a reflection of the whole Genesis story up until now from 12 onward, which is he has known he's going to have a son, but he doesn't know how or when or where. And now he knows he's going to sacrifice his son, but he doesn't know how or when or where. And so, I don't know. So like, I mean, maybe you think of it as like, God knows Abraham has been responsive in this one way, right? I'm going to give you something if you do all of this. And now it's like, are you going to be responsive if you're going to lose something? And so Abraham is being, like a different side of Abraham is being tested or something like that. Yeah,
I wonder if it could also sort of play on the, once you're a parent, it's different. Like, like it. Yes. And so before it was sort of like God was asking Avram to be just sort of like totally open, vulnerable at the mercy of whatever the next information Avram was going to get would be. And that is definitely an element of this also. I don't know if this is in the text, but like in my own heart, like once you're a parent, you have to have you have power. Like you're also in charge of some things.
Yes.
In a way that becomes really, really clear. And so I don't know. It just feels so different in this moment to say like, I'm asking you to do this thing and you're going to have to pack up your child and be in charge of stuff in order to do it, let alone the fact that in the end, what I'm asking is that you sacrifice your child. Like it's a different ask even without the sacrifice to it. Like even just saying, take your son and go somewhere that I will show you is different.
Yes.
Once there's a child in the picture.
That parental obligation, like, so now Abraham has competing obligations in this really interesting way that you're talking about.
Right.
And so his response to God is so interesting to me. Like in that Genesis 18 text, at the end of that story, when the angels are going to go destroy Sodom, like Abraham spends considerable time and energy arguing with God about why God shouldn't go and do that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Here, Abraham, he gets this command from God, and it just says he got up early in the morning, harnessed donkey, got his people together, got the wood together, and off he goes. We don't get any glimpse into the inner life of Abraham. Abraham doesn't say anything. Can you help me just think about how should we think about Abraham and his response here?
How indeed, Bobby. Most years when I have read this, I have been a little bit of an Abraham apologist, I think. And I kept coming back to, I don't know what it is like what the text tells us is that God said these things to Abraham. So if I take the text at its word and don't say, no, Abraham hallucinated,
right?
You could make that case. That's not what the text says. I don't know what it's like to have that kind of experience and clarity that Abraham has. And I don't know that one could just say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
Because before, when Abraham is arguing with God, it's not that God has told Abraham to do something and he says no. God has told Abraham what God is going to do. So it's not sort of inside the parameters of a command.
Yes.
All of that said, this year as I read this, it just, maybe because Abraham doesn't say anything, it just feels like a dream sequence. Like, I don't know how to relate to Abraham as a character. Like, I don't, for all the space where God pointed out, or where the text pointed out in chapter 21, how God was so intimately involved in the arrival of this son in the first place. Here, it really is only talking about Isaac's relationship to Abraham. It's not saying, take that son that I just gave you and bring him up to the mountain. That part's over. Now it's just your son that you love and give him back.
Yes.
I don't know how to make that. I don't know how to make that touchdown in the reality of my human experience.
Amy, one of the things that the way that you referred to the sacrifice a minute ago was take your son whom you love and give him back. And that was one of the questions I had about that word as a whole burnt offering. I guess I'm curious, do you read that as a sacrifice to God in the way that people are later going to sacrifice to God in the temple, like that kind of whole burnt offering? Or is this, is it about the offering to God, or is it about the death of the child? Is this would another technique of execution accomplish the same thing? Or is there something specific about the burnt offering component?
You mean, would another way of murdering your child?
Yeah, one way to read it is the test is, will you give up your child? Which is to behead them or something would accomplish that task. But this is not said exactly that way. It's said as a whole burnt offering. And so is there something more than simply are you willing to execute your child for me?
I mean, gosh, it's so stark when you put it in those terms, but of course those are the terms to put it in. I guess what's in my mind is sort of what would eventually evolve into the first fruits kinds of offerings, which is, the first of things that you so desperately want, that's the last thing you want to give up.
Yes.
Because you didn't know if it would really, really happen, and now it has. And if you get some more, then you could give up the more, but you want to hold on to the first thing. So I think that is, I don't know, and the whole sort of model for that in the biblical text seems to be offering. It's sort of an acknowledgement that this thing came from God, and by offering it instead of just killing it, it somehow sanctifies that relationship in particular. So I guess I would say it does have to be sacrifice and not some other kind of, it's not the death, it's the sacrifice, but that entails death.
That's a really nice way of saying it. I think that's an important nuance. Maybe that doesn't need to be said, but I think I appreciate you having said it, that it's about it's the giving back to God, and that piece is important in there. not just are you willing to give it up, but are you willing to give him up for me? Mm-hmm. Something like that. My question about the nature of the test comes back right here, which is to say, do we think God really intends at this moment that Abraham should do this? Mm-hmm. Or does God intend at this moment that Abraham should go through the motions of doing this?
Right.
I don't know if that looks any different at this moment than it did when I asked you that question a few minutes ago.
I want to put maybe I don't know if it's quite a third option, but maybe it's a third option on the table, which is that God doesn't know yet how God wants this to go.
Yes, I like that.
That maybe God does want the sacrifice, but also, I don't know, like wants to see what happens now that this human has gotten the beloved son that they have wanted, but that it's not quite all planned out in advance.
I like that a lot. That God genuinely has something that God wants to know, that God currently does not know. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And God is sort of engaged in this whole process in the way that Abraham is as well. And the outcome, and even the desired outcome, is not yet known. That Abraham and God are doing a thing together. I really like that a lot. I think that's a good reading of it. And it holds things open. It doesn't just dismiss this as like, oh yeah, God already kind of knows how it's going to turn out. It's like, here is a genuine... It's not
like psychological torture, which I think it kind of is.
It could be
if you read it as just a test.
They are both genuinely invested in this process in ways that of which the outcome is currently unknown. I like that a lot. When they get to the place where they're going to go, Abraham tells the other servants, stay here. The boy and I will walk up there, worship, and then come back to you. Mm-hmm. That we will come back to you suggests something.
It does.
Either Abraham has not understood what God has asked, and so he's like, yeah, we're going to go up there and come back. Or that Abraham is lying. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go up there and sacrifice my kid, and I'm going to come back to you. But I can't tell you that. Or that Abraham has this profound trust. God has told me to sacrifice my son, but somehow this is all going to work out and we're both going to come back. Mm-hmm. Does one of those possibilities resonate with you, or is there another one you would want to put on the table?
Those are the only possibilities I can think of, Bobby. I have often heard it suggested that it's that Abraham's lying because he thinks the servants will try to stop him from doing it.
Yeah.
Although at this moment, I wonder if they really would stop it. I mean, child sacrifice was a thing that happened in the ancient world.
Yes.
I don't know if I don't know enough to know about this particular context to know whether they might or might not try to stop it. At this moment, I want to read it as a statement of faith, although I know that's a big jump because Abraham says so little in this whole pericope. In the verse prior to this, verse 4, it says, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. And the place is Hamakom, which in the Jewish tradition, that is one of the names of God.
Oh.
And so there's a tradition that he looked up and saw God from afar and so knew that was the place to go. And that the Midrash goes, Isaac also could see God from afar. And the servants did not see God on the mountain. And so they had faith to go and also awareness that the servants shouldn't go. But it's a stretch. I feel like the text, it doesn't give me the answers that I want.
Yeah.
How do you think about it, Bobby?
No, I appreciate your raising up the complexity of this moment. I feel like I come back to this film a lot with you for some reason, but there's this film I know that you know called Life is Beautiful from back in the late 90s, set in the Holocaust, and the main character in the concentration camp is trying to keep it light for his children so they don't understand the horror of what is happening around them. And I kind of read that this way, that Abraham he's still holding on to some hope that maybe some things can work out. And he is trying to protect Isaac from understanding what seems to be the outcome of this. And so I think for me, a statement of faith might be a little strong, but a statement of like, we don't know how this is going to go. And so we might as well hold on to hope until the cause for hope has been taken from us. And I'm protecting my child in the meantime.
Just like that movie that is so heart-wrenching and beautiful at the same time, like that it's protective in a way. Like, I hope this terrible thing is not going to happen. It sure looks like it's going to happen, but let's not get ahead of it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the new season of Bible Worm. We're so glad you've joined us. As a gift to you, for the month of September, Amy and I are offering every Bible Worm listener a chance to join our Patreon community for free for 1 month with no automatic renewals and no obligation to continue. You'll receive the podcast a week before everyone else, full liturgies written by our friend Terry Peterson, video Bible studies with discussion questions led by yours truly, and a monthly visit with the Bible Worm Collaborative to explore texts upcoming in the Narrative Lectionary. If you've ever wanted to try our Patreon, or if you're just hearing about it for the first time, here's your chance. To join the Bible Worm Patreon for free, just look for the gift link on our Facebook page, in the Narrative Lectionary Facebook group, or in the description of this episode on your podcast application or at BibleWormPodcast.com. Join anytime between now and the end of September to receive your 1 month free. We hope to see you soon, and thanks for listening to Bible Worm. Now, back to this week's episode. Okay, so let's pick back up in verse 6. Abraham took the wood for the entirely burned offering and laid it on his son Isaac. He took the fire and the knife in his hand, and the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father, "My father?" Abraham said, "I'm here, my son." Isaac said, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the entirely burned offering?" Abraham said, "The lamb for the entirely burned offering? God will see to it, my son." The two of them walked on together. They arrived at the place God had described to him. Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He tied up his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. Okay, so this kind of extends that thing we were just talking about, where Abraham's words and his actions are in some tension with each other. Isaac is kind of catching on here a little bit, right? Like, okay, I got the wood, you got the knife.
We're missing something,
seems
Daddy.
like there's something missing. Yeah. Do you, first of all, make anything of Isaac carrying the wood, or is this just a matter of like, it's a lot to carry?
I mean, I think, gosh, it can raise a lot of different questions. I mean, one thing is if he's carrying the wood, this is not a toddler.
Right.
And it does have him sort of more actively participating in this whole situation. Now, his question goes on to suggest that maybe he doesn't understand what he is actively participating in, which is horrible.
Right.
There are midrash that suggest that he does know what he is participating in, and he is willingly taking part of this and is basically a young man at this point.
Yes.
I think for me, it just makes it more poignant to have him carrying the wood.
I think I like that a lot. And I mean, one of the questions throughout this whole text is, what do the characters in this text know?
That's right.
And including God. What does God know? What does Abraham know? What does Isaac know? And how do they feel about it? And we don't get any of that really from the text itself. And so Isaac may be an innocent, unknowing, I mean, he is innocent, but he may be an unknowing victim here, or he may have figured out what's happening and is going along with it. And we don't really have any way to sort that out. A Christian interpretation, of course, will read Isaac carrying the wood as a prefiguration of Jesus carrying the cross, and which makes a whole other like set of connections to me, the interesting way to read that is not to say like, oh, well, this story is a prefiguration of Jesus, but instead to read it the other way, which is to say, when we read the Jesus story, if we look back on this one, what do we take from it? So it's just a matter of the directionality of the reading. So I want to leave that interpretation aside, but I just want to name that that's the way that often is read.
Yeah.
When Isaac says, my father, Abraham responds with the same Hineni that he responded to previously. That just is very striking to me, just as a textual feature. Yeah. Do you do anything with that?
Yeah, I do just about everything. Like all the things. I don't know if I'm overreading it, but I feel like the clearest and really only clue that I have in this text that Abraham isn't just resigned to killing it isn't sort of like unemotionally be like, oh, well, this son thing didn't work out. So, like you can kind of turn off your emotions at a certain point. And the fact that he responds to his son's call in the same way that he responds to God's call suggests to me that he is very aware of his deep connection and commitment on both sides and is just trying to do the next thing and doesn't know what that's all going to wind up looking like.
I love that, Amy. If we read Hineni as something like fully present to the one who has beckoned you, then we've got Abraham fully present to God and fully present to Isaac. And there is not a way that those two full presences seem to be able to reconcile at this moment. That's
right. And I feel like before we get to that point, I start to read him as like he must be on autopilot. There's no way Abraham is still functioning emotionally at this point in the story. Yes. But that says to me, like, no, he's not on autopilot. He is here.
The question that Isaac asks is a fairly straightforward question about like how, like, we don't have an animal for the sacrifice. Abraham's response is, God will see to it, my son. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is another one of those statements that could be read in multiple ways. And it's the same question we were asking before about, like, is Abraham trusting or lying or what's he doing? Yeah. Do you have a way of reading this statement?
I have a way that just popped into my head 1 second ago as you were formulating the question. So it is untested, but I was a little surprised to see the Hebrew is actually literally your lo. Like it is literally, he will see it.
Yeah.
Like he will see it, the, lamb or whatever, goat, whatever it is we're supposed to sacrifice here. And that had me thinking back to these other passages where God keeps telling Abraham, go to the place I'll show you. Like there's something, you're going to see something and then you're going to know. And that brings me back to this question of whether God is really set in what exactly is going to happen here, or if it's that they're going to get to this point and then God is going to see what to do.
Yes.
So right now, yes, you certainly could read it as another way of trying to protect his son, of saying like, it's all going to be fine. You don't need to be worrying about that. Or as God is going to figure out how this is going to go when we get there.
What you're saying there is so important, Amy, and it's easy to miss in this text. But in Hebrew, the root ra'ah, to see, can be used in this way of like to see to it, right? So like that's where you get the provision or provide. But the root in this text, like repeatedly is ra'ah, to see. And so that the translations tend to say sometimes he'll see, he'll provide, he'll see to it. But it's all the same. Like even Moriah is related to that root. And so this is a text about seeing. And so what you're saying there, God will provide, really is God will see it. Or you could translate that, God will see to it for himself, like something like that. I think it's Rashi who reads Abraham here as telling Isaac what's about to happen. God will see to it. And then Beni, my son, by which he means my son is the lamb for the offering. But he says it in a way that Isaac's not going to recognize it. It's that like speaking the truth in a way that protects him from the truth.
Yeah.
And so this sort of like life is beautiful sort of arrangement where you don't want to lie to your kid, but at the same time, you are trying to protect them. I just think I'm pretty sure that's Rashi. And I just think it's so interesting as a way of trying to read that character.
Yeah.
When they get to the place, Moriah, and they get to the mountaintop, the time really slows down. Like we've been, from the time that God announced Abraham's made a 3 days journey, and like we have been moving at a clip. He got up and did the thing, and here we are. And then all of a sudden, it's like excruciatingly slow. He builds the offering, he arranges the wood, he takes his son, he lays him on there, stretches out his hand. Even that last verse, he took his hand, he took the knife, he stretched out his hand. Like it is now like every single motion gets its own narrative. And so we're fixated on that knife and what is about to happen next. Do you have thoughts about like why are we stretching this action out so much?
I mean, narratively, I guess there are just moments in life that are like that where everything seems to sort of stop or slow down. Like it's like a video version of portrait mode. And this is one of those, I don't know what moment could be bigger than this. And you remember every little thing around big life and death moments, especially.
Yes.
And often we don't know when we're in life and death moments, or at least death moments, but now he very much knows that he is in that moment. It doesn't necessarily say that he moved any slower doing these things,
No, it doesn't say, yeah.
But that is our experience of it as readers, that he is taking maybe as much time as humanly possible on each of these steps because he doesn't want to sacrifice his son, and maybe I don't know if it's just if he's actually hoping at this point that something else, some other possibility will appear, or just trying to delay the inevitable, but that is certainly how it reads.
Abraham at the end stretches out his hand to sacrifice his son. My question is, if the story ended right here, would Abraham have done what God commanded him to do?
Meaning, what do I think would have happened next? Or has this met the requirement?
Has this met the requirement?
No. How would it have met the requirement? I would love for the answer to be yes, but I can't think of how it is yes. Can you think of how it's yes?
Well, I agree with you 1,000% that Abraham has not carried out the test. But I think often this text is read as though he did. And so I just wanted to get that on the record. That if you stopped right here, he hasn't actually he's done everything up until the thing, and there's no reason to think he's not going to do it.
Right.
But he hasn't actually
done it. Yeah.
All right, let's pick up then in verse 11. But the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." Abraham said, "I'm here." The messenger said, "Don't stretch out your hand against the young man and don't do anything to him. I now know that you revere God and didn't hold back your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a single ram caught by its horns in the dense underbrush. Abraham went over, took the ram, and offered it as an entirely burned offering instead of his son. Abraham named that place, "The Lord Sees." That is the reason people today say, "On this mountain, the Lord is seen." So at this crucial moment, the angel of the Lord interrupts, and we get a reference back to the beginning of this text where God says, "Abraham." But here we have the angel of the Lord saying, "Abraham, Abraham," and then we get the Hineni. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious about how do you think about the interruption? Like, why does he say the name twice? Why does he interrupt here? What's your experience of this moment in the text?
I think I feel urgency in the double Abraham? I mean, once he is poised, I mean, I know I just said he seems not to be in autopilot when he is having that really painful conversation with his son, but we get nothing after that. Like, I don't know how he is going through all these motions. And so I don't know if at some point in his preparation, once he's raised the knife, sort of is like Abraham has left the building. Like, yes. we don't know what is going on in his mind or his heart at that point. And so the double Abraham feels like a recognition of that, and that it would be really easy for him to sort of just tip over the edge of this experience that has been very slowly building, but now they're really at the peak of it.
I read it, I think, similarly. I don't know what you're going to think about this. I read this text as a game of chicken. Where God says, I want you to do this thing, Abraham. And Abraham says, okay. And so here's the moment. The knife is back. Who's going to blink? Is Abraham going to drop the knife? No, God blinks and says, whoa, 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 Abraham. In my reading, something in the relationship between God and Abraham shifts right here. Because God has had to relinquish the test. And I don't quite know what the and is. But that's the way that I tend to read it, is there is an urgency. And the urgency, I think, is exactly that it appears that Abraham is going to do the thing. Yeah. And God realized, like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Like, I don't actually want you to do the thing.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know that Abraham would have done it. Like, maybe Abraham would have blinked a millisecond later, or maybe he wouldn't have.
Or if we go back to this idea of God maybe not having all this quite planned out in advance, it could have taken to that moment, seeing like, oh, this is actually what's going to happen, for God to realize, like, oh no, I want sacrifice in the abstract, but I don't want this.
Right.
But it's that same thing that you're talking about is yes, some realization that, like, oh, this is actually going to happen and I don't want this to happen.
It's so interesting because the angel, or, this is like always in Genesis, the difference between the angel of the Lord and the Lord is very thin. And so at some point, God begins to talk. I think you can just read the angel even as God talking. Says, now I know that you revere God and didn't hold back your son. And so that now I know, I think fits nicely with what you're saying, which is maybe God didn't know previously. And so this test has actually been, God needed to know some stuff. And so it's not been a sort of like for the good of Abraham or like a just going through the motions test, but God has been engaged in this process and has realized some things, as you're saying. It's interesting that God says, I know because you did not hold back your son from me. But just a minute ago, we were saying that the test isn't actually completed. And so God has learned some things without the sacrifice actually having to be complete. Do you have thoughts about that now I know that God says there?
I mean, I think what you were saying about chicken sort of makes a lot of sense, is that God goes as far as possible before it seems like we can't go any further. Like it's, you can't wait any long. And so you just believe the other person's gonna actually do this crazy, risky thing. There's a midrash that you probably know that the reason it says Abraham is that after the first Abraham isn't soon enough, and Abraham does kill Isaac.
Yes.
And then God brings Isaac back to life and then calls Abraham again. And of course, if you have that sort of story in your mind, then that is not what the text says. Clearly. But maybe they were trying to explain that same thing. Like, how is it that now God knows because Abraham didn't actually carry out the sacrifice?
I do know that midrash, and I like the way that you're reading it. The question that people often ask of texts is, what's bothering Rashi, or what's irritating the rabbis? Like, what problem are they trying to solve? And I think right there, I think that's a really nice reading. There's two problems there. One is the double speaking of the name. And the other is this lingering sense that Abraham didn't actually follow through. And so that midrash solves both of those problems in the text. He did follow through, and the name there is twice because God resurrected in the meantime. Yeah, I mean, to me, what's interesting about that is like, what is that showing us about the biblical text that was irritating, like generating that interpretation?
Yeah.
God then provides a ram to be burned in the place of Isaac. And the story kind of reaches a happy conclusion. How do you read the presence of the ram here to be sacrificed?
Well, first, I just want to notice that in the text, it doesn't say God provided the ram. It says Abraham looked up and his eyes fell on a ram, which is not so weird in the mountains. Like,
that's true.
Mountain rams. I don't know. But I was looking before at the Hebrew, and it says ayil achar, like maybe a ram sort of like behind, that there was a ram behind. But then there's also, some people read it echad, one ram. Oh. I started wondering whether it could be acher, like another ram.
Another ram, yeah.
And that, I don't know, for some reason that last possibility felt powerful to me, resonant to me, that like, and it raises a question again, like, what did Abraham know or not know when he told his child that there was going to be a ram?
Amy, the last thing in this text I want to ask you is, Abraham calls the place the Lord sees, but then when people talk about it, they say the Lord is seen. Those are not exactly the same thing. Do you do anything with that?
My translation's a little different, so I'm just like taking a moment to sort of take in the difference between those two. And it's making me think, we pointed to a point in the text earlier where it says, God, when we were talking about the ram showing up, like God will see to it. Like there is a sense of like God seeing. And there is also a sense that God is seen on the mountain, especially if you think of, they look up the mountain and they see the place, Hamakom, that they see God on the mountain. I don't know. I think it's really interesting to hold together the idea of God seeing something and us seeing something, like that we sort of, a place where the veil is thin and we can kind of see into each other's worlds.
I like that a lot, Amy. And, these are the Kal and the Nifal of the same root that we've been playing with this whole time. And to me, it takes my head there. And also, we've been talking about how this text teaches us something about Abraham, but that God is also made known in this text, or like God is also learning in this text. So that sort of play of like God sees, and so God now knows some things that God needs to know, but God is also now seen in a different kind of a way because of what has happened, what has transpired in the text. And so there's movement in both directions. Yeah. Amy, this text is an enormously rich text, and it has so many people have written so many things through the centuries about it. And so it's a daunting text to try to pull out threads from. But I'm curious, as you're reading it in this time, in this place, where are you finding yourself in this text?
It is just an impossible question, Bobby. This year, this moment, this hour that I'm reading this text, I'm thinking actually about a Leonard Cohen song called The Story of Isaac that is about this story and is heartbreaking, as I'm sure you can imagine. But you put Leonard Cohen together with this story and like it's all over. But he asks a really pointed question in the song, which is for what cause that may seem like God to us are we willing to sacrifice our children? And so in his case, he's talking about the Vietnam War, but we could talk about it in any number of cases at this moment. And so having that song in my head, I feel so aware reading this story of how little Abraham and Isaac talk to each other. I wonder how often they looked at each other. Like, I wonder if, You have that sort of voice in your head that this text tells us is God. So, okay, like I'll take the text at its word. But we also know that sense of God that sort of moves in us as compassion when we look at the person that we feel some kind of imperative to harm or dehumanize in some kind of way. And making it his son, I just feel like just makes it almost puts it outside the whole conversation because you know how much pain he must be in doing this. But I guess the question on my heart reading this text this year are sort of what are the principles or values or arguments for which I am willing to hurt or dehumanize someone who is standing right in front of me? And what would it be like if I looked them in the face while I was doing it instead of decidedly not looking them in the face while I was doing it? If I let the tension that comes from compassion actually do its work, what would happen? Maybe I'd fail the test. I don't know.
Amy, that is so beautiful. I feel a little bit like that is what needs to be said about this text.
You got something else in there, Bobby.
Well, I do, but it feels a little... I do. I think that's a really lovely interpretation of, the sort of human side of this text. I've been gesturing along the way to, I think this text says something about God, and it's kind of a curious thing that it says about God to me, but, there's a tension in the God of the Hebrew scripture. This Brueggemann makes a big point of this, that the way he says it is there's a disjunction at the heart of God. There is on the one hand the God who is holy and sovereign and desires obedience. And there is a part of God that is deeply committed and faithful and desires relationship. And those two things are not always aligned with each other. We see this like in Exodus 34, and we see it in the Numbers 14 text where God is so angry at Israel, he wants to destroy them. And Moses says, don't forget, you're a compassionate God. And God's like, oh yeah. And I read this text a little bit that way. Up until this moment in the text, what God has wanted from humans is obedience. And this has been the thing that animates the text. And, humans weren't obedient earlier and there was a flood and so on. And God chose Abraham for apparently no reason. And sort of belatedly, God seems to be wanting to know, like, wait a second, is Abraham really going to be obedient? And so God commands that to see whether Abraham really is obedient. But Abraham, playing this kind of game of chicken or whatever he's doing, pushes God to the conclusion of that question. And when it comes down to it, God says, actually, that's not what's most important to me.
Right.
What's most important to me is this person and his son whom he loves. And so God at the last instant chooses relationship over obedience. And so this is, in my mind, this is a moment where God's relationship to Abraham, to Israel, to humanity shifts. Such that tension is still there, but the weight, in a sense, is now on the other foot, where ultimately God chooses committed covenantal relationship. And this is sort of the moment where that shift sort of happens. I don't know if you notice, I'm sure you do, but this text also shifts from Elohim language to Adonai language. It's Elohim who commands the test and Adonai who disrupts it. And so you got the two different names for God, like embodying these two different things. And so I think just the place for me to land that is just to say the God that is revealed in this text is a God who does not, contrary to the way this text is actually often interpreted, desire wooden obedience, but a God who gets wooden obedience in this text and ultimately decides that's not what God actually wants. God wants an active partner who has got their own kind of agency, and this an invitation to us to exercise agency in the face of a God who is ultimately committed to us.
Bobby, I love that so much. And I love the idea that God needed a partner who was going to go all the way to the brink of that. Like you have to feel that kind of like safety and respect and like whatever to be like, oh no, wait, that's not actually what I want.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amy, next week we're going to be over in chapter 27 and part of 28, which is the story of Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau.
Another good story.
Another good story. I loved reading this text with you, Amy. I can't wait to see what we get to discover
it's good
next
every
week.
time. I don't know how. This story, man.
This text has so much in it.
Yeah.
All right, Amy. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.
I'll see you next time. Be well.
You too. Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us again next time as we read Genesis 27, 1-4 and 15-23, and Genesis 28, 10-17, the story of Jacob and Esau, and Jacob's vision of God at Bethel. Until then, keep on digging.